On a still winter night, the wide wooden house of a wealthy rancher carried a different kind of breath. Samuel Carter leaned back on the long chair, his eyes half closed as if caught in a dream. Yet his heart pounded hard with every small gesture of the maid. Eliza knelt beside him, her slender hands dipping into a basin of warm water, carefully stroking the calloused top of his foot. Each time the wet cloth passed, Samuel felt his whole body ignite, every muscle drawn tight, caught between shame and yearning. He clenched his jaw, but at last could no longer resist. His hand closed over hers. In that instant their breaths tangled and the air in the room shifted, and in Samuel's chest a sudden thought flickered. Tonight, it might not end with a single touch. The first winds of winter swept through the Wyoming Valley, carrying a biting cold that slipped through every crack in the doors, every seam of the stone walls. On the wide wooden porch, Samuel Carter stood alone, his tall frame wrapped in a heavy coat, eyes fixed on a horizon painted red by the setting sun. At 35, he was master of one of the largest ranches in the territory. Thousands of acres, thousands of cattle, a house furnished with everything from rugs hauled in from Denver to crystal lamps gleaming in every room. Outsiders believed Samuel had it all. Yet inside this house, the emptiness rang louder than any wealth could cover. 3 years earlier, fever had taken his wife, Margaret, and their young child. Since laying them beneath the cottonwood tree on the hill behind the house, Samuel had not known peace. He buried himself in work, expanding the ranch, buying more land, pouring his mind into numbers and contracts, as if keeping busy might keep sorrow from breaking through. But this evening, as the sky burned quiet and orange, he felt the loneliness running through his veins more sharply than ever. "Mr. Carter," a timid voice broke his thoughts. Samuel turned. In the doorway stood a young woman, slight of build, her dark curly hair tied back, gray-brown eyes lit with a touch of hesitation. Her plain brown work dress made her look all the more modest. She was Eliza Johnson, the new maid, not a month into her service, come all the way from distant Ohio. In her hands rested a silver tray with a steaming bowl, a few slices of fresh bread, and a glass of water. She stepped forward carefully, holding it steady as if the smallest tremor might bring it all crashing down. "Mrs. Henderson asked me to bring supper. Beef stew with bread, sir." Her voice was soft as wind, barely crossing her lips. Samuel gave a slight nod, saying nothing. He was used to silence in this house, used to the heavy tread of the housekeeper, used to commands, not shy voices. Yet tonight, something in Eliza's quiet tone made his eyes linger longer than usual. She reached the long wooden table. As she set the tray down, her hand brushed against his where it rested on the table. A fleeting touch, but both froze. Her hand was slender, warm, trembling slightly. Samuel drew his back, startled by a strange feeling he had long forbidden himself to know. Eliza flushed, stepping away in haste. She dared not meet her employer's gaze, only gave a small bow before turning for the door. Yet passing the east wall, her eyes caught on the large portrait that hung there. Margaret in her white wedding dress, holding their infant son. The lamplight glowed against the canvas, making the gentle face seem alive, smiling into the room. Eliza paused longer than she should have. In her gray-brown eyes passed a veil of sorrow, faint as mist but clear enough for Samuel to see. It was not curiosity nor pity. It was understanding, the kind he had not seen in anyone since that fateful day. Samuel's chest grew heavy. He was used to looks of admiration for his wealth, wary eyes across the bargaining table, or pity when the past was mentioned. But never had anyone gazed upon that portrait with such quiet gentleness, as if Eliza, too, knew the taste of loss. The young woman startled, realizing she had lingered. She bowed her head quickly and slipped through the heavy wooden door, her small figure vanishing from sight. The room was left to Samuel once more, with only the warmth of beef stew and the memory of her eyes. He sat down, hands still remembering the brief touch from moments before. A touch meaningless to anyone else but to him, who had gone 3 years without letting anyone cross the boundaries of his solitude. It made the stone around his heart stir faintly. He looked to the portrait. Margaret's smile remained there, tender, eternal. But tonight, for the first time in years, he saw not only the shadow of the past, but also the flicker of a young woman's eyes walking out the door. And Samuel Carter wondered, how could a stranger's gaze reach the wound he had buried so deep? Night fell fast over Wyoming, thick as a coarse wool blanket. The ranch sank into silence, broken only by the wind howling through the valley and the creak of old wooden doors. Samuel Carter was used to sitting alone in his study until the fire in the hearth burned low, then dragging himself upstairs. But tonight, as he walked down the dark hall, a faint sound from the kitchen made him stop. It wasn't a sharp noise, but words, whispers spilling into the stillness. He moved quietly, letting his shadow blend into the dark, and halted at the doorway of the wide kitchen. The hanging oil lamp cast a thin yellow glow, just enough to show Eliza standing at the wooden basin, hands dipped in water as she washed warm bowls. She did not know she was being watched. Her narrow shoulders rose and fell with each breath. Her curls glimmered faintly in the dim light. Then Samuel heard her voice, slender, trembling, as if she were speaking to herself to hold off the loneliness. "Don't be weak, Eliza. You're luckier than most girls," she murmured, the trickle of water threading through her words. "At least you've got a roof, a job. Not everyone has that. The master is stern but fair. Only his eyes. They look like they're staring at ghosts." Samuel stood frozen. His eyes, the ones people had avoided for years, now reflected back at him in her unguarded voice. She had seen the truth he had tried to bury. And strangely, instead of anger or shame, what rose in him was a faint ache and a quiet sense of being understood. Eliza kept whispering, as though the empty kitchen was the only place she dared set her burdens down. "Just don't let Mrs. Henderson think you're clumsy. If you get dismissed, there'll be nowhere left to go. I'm not like those girls on the train. Some found decent homes. Some wound up in saloons in Denver. They cried all night, knowing how their lives would end." She paused, drew in a breath, then gave a small, self-mocking laugh. "At least I still have these hands to work with. If I keep steady, it'll be all right." Samuel felt his chest tighten, as if he had swallowed a burning stone. He had never thought of her beyond the role of a quiet servant, but in her fragile words he glimpsed another world, of wounds, fears, and simple gratitude. He turned away, letting the shadows swallow him, not because he wanted to leave, but because he feared the pounding of his heart would give him away. In the nights that followed, Samuel found himself lingering by the kitchen later and later, pausing in the dark to listen. And every night, Eliza spoke. Perhaps she needed an outlet for her crowded thoughts, and the wooden walls and dishwater became her companions. My parents died young. I had to fend for myself, working in my uncle's little store, until he couldn't keep it. When I heard of the train west for hired girls, I thought, maybe that's a chance. Turns out, chance is a gamble. Samuel pictured her, huddled on a rattling train, surrounded by other girls, some eager, some weeping, some silent as stone. Not everyone who traveled with me found safety, Eliza went on. One girl was sent to a dance hall. She cried herself sick that night. I was frightened, but grateful I ended up here at this ranch. Even if it's lonely, at least I still belong to myself. Samuel gripped the doorframe, his fingers whitening. The words weren't for him, yet each one cut deep. This young woman, who seemed so slight, carried a resilience he had never taken time to see. She sighed, then gave a low, sad laugh. Mr. Carter. He'll never know. To him, I'm nothing, just a shadow moving through the house. But when I see him sitting alone under the lamp, I feel pity. Like a man living with ghosts, Samuel wanted to step forward, to tell her he heard, that she was no shadow to him. But the words lodged in his throat. One sound would shatter the fragile spell of the moment. And strangely, he did not want that. He let her words sink in, quietly laying claim to a space in his heart he thought long dead. That night, when he returned to his room, Samuel could not sleep. Eliza's whispers echoed still, her fear of being cast out, her plain gratitude, her vision of ghosts in his eyes. He realized that in this house thought to be filled with silence, there had been a warm voice speaking all along. He lay there, staring at the timber ceiling, and for the first time in years, he did not think of the graves on the hill. He thought of the young woman sleeping somewhere under his roof. Samuel Carter drew in a long breath and closed his eyes. In his heart, a hollow space was filled with the smallest of sounds, yet steady as an underground spring. And he wondered, if he kept listening, would there come a day when he no longer lived as a man among ghosts? In the nights that followed, Samuel's study became a place he waited for. Not for the figures in his ledgers, but for the quiet presence of Eliza. He would lean back on the long chair, dim the lamp, arranging himself to look like a man worn out who had drifted into sleep. The door creaked open, and Eliza stepped in with her familiar tray. She cleared away the dishes he left unfinished, drew a blanket over him, added wood to the fire. Then, as though it had become a new ritual, she set a basin of warm water on the floor. Eliza knelt beside him, dipping the cloth, wringing it to just the right heat, and pressing it gently against his feet. Her small fingers stroked along his ankles, across the tops of his calloused feet. She did it all with patient care, as if it were not duty, but a way of offering comfort. Samuel kept his eyes shut, breath steady. Yet each touch sent a tautness through his body. It had been years since anyone laid hands on him with such simple tenderness. Every pass of the warm cloth sent a heat straight to his chest. He wanted to pull back, but could not. Bowing her head, Eliza whispered, "His work has worn the skin raw. I'll ease his feet. At least tonight he'll rest well." Samuel bit down hard. Never had he imagined that a maid could shake the wall he had built for 3 long years. When she finished, Eliza paused, glancing at him. Samuel kept his breathing even. A blanket was pulled up, lightly spread across his shoulders. The fire cracked as she fed it, her shadow dancing high against the wall. Then, as every night, She drew a small tin from her apron pocket and set it on the table. "His hands are so cracked," she murmured, her voice nearly swallowed by the flames. To Samuel, each word landed like a prayer. He felt the warmth of her touch as she took his hand, rough from labor, hardened by wind. Her fingers moved carefully, smoothing the salve across his skin, slow and deliberate. He knew he should stay still, keep her believing he slept. But each stroke poured fire into him, tender yet clumsy, leaving his throat tight. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, only fire crackle and tangled breath filled the room. Suddenly, Samuel could not hold himself. His hand closed, gripping hers. Eliza jerked, startled, trying to pull back, but the strong hand of the man held firm, refusing release. Samuel opened his eyes, dark pupils locking on her wide, startled gaze in the flickering light. You're not asleep." Her voice trembled, cheeks burning red. Samuel searched her face as though seeking something there. She tried to draw away, but he pulled gently, bringing her closer until her small face hovered only a breath away. He saw the smooth brown skin glowing in firelight, the lips quivering, the faint scent of bread on her breath. "Thank you," he whispered, voice hoarse, breaking the silence. Just 2 words, yet Eliza froze. She dropped her gaze, body shaking, hand still caught in his. Her heart raced. No one had ever thanked her with such eyes. No one had ever held her hand as if she mattered. Slowly, Samuel let his grip ease, though his gaze did not falter. Eliza stumbled to her feet, lips moving without sound. She bent low, almost fleeing the room, leaving the open tin of salve on the table. Samuel sat up, flooded with a feeling both strange and familiar. He had believed his heart died with his wife and child, that no one could reach it again. Yet with the trembling fingers of a maid, he felt his blood run hot, the dark thinning around him. That night, sleep never came. The image stayed, the girl kneeling at his side, smoothing balm onto his battered hands as if it were her greatest gift. And in his chest, a voice stirred. Perhaps he no longer wished to pretend at sleep. That night, snow came earlier than the season allowed. Thick white flakes struck the glass panes, wind shrieking through the cracks as if to tear the roof away. Samuel sat in his study, eyes fixed on meaningless numbers, though his mind held only the image of the girl who slipped in each evening. He waited for the familiar sound of the door, the light tread of her steps. The door opened, and Eliza appeared, balancing the supper tray as always. But this time her steps faltered, her gait unsteady. Samuel frowned and rose at once. Before he could speak, she staggered and collapsed, the tray clattering, bowls striking against one another. "Eliza!" He rushed forward, catching her slight frame. In his arms she burned with heat, trembling with fever. I'm sorry, sir. I'm only a little tired." Her voice was faint, broken. Samuel did not let her finish. He lifted her and laid her on the long chair beside the fire. His hands shook as he touched her damp brow. "God above, you're burning. And still you carried the tray to me?" Her lips pressed tight, eyes shut, breath shallow. Samuel turned quickly, poured warm water into a bowl, and fetched a clean cloth. Without hesitation, he bent and loosened the damp dress clinging to her, leaving only the thin, faded undergarment worn by years of washing. In the wavering firelight, her pale brown skin, slick with sweat, glistened fragile, and his chest knotted. He dipped the cloth, wrung it dry, and gently wiped her face, her neck, her shoulders. Each stroke drew a faint sound from her, a soft thread of a moan that pierced him with pity and made his heart pound. "Easy now. I'm here," Samuel whispered, his voice rough. He worked slowly, carefully, from her brow to her hands, down to her chilled feet. These were not the motions of a master tending a servant, but of a man terrified of losing someone again. When Eliza shivered hard, Samuel gave in, lowering himself beside the chair and pulling her into his chest, letting his warmth cover her. She stirred weakly, her head falling to his shoulder, breath burning against his neck. He held her tighter, murmuring, "Don't be afraid. You're not alone." That night, he never left her side. As she drifted in fever, he changed the cloth, wiped her skin, held her hand steady in his. Once she opened her eyes, gazed at him through a haze, lips parting as if to speak, but then closed them again, leaving him aching in silence. Near midnight, her fever raged, soaking the thin garment to her skin. Samuel turned his face aside, but could not banish the pull of her fragility. He cursed himself for such thoughts, reminding that his only duty was to see her well. When she moaned again, he bent close, his whisper steady in her ear. "You will come through this. I swear I won't let you fall." And he drew her tighter still, holding her trembling body as if his arms alone could shield her from death. That night, in a house long cold, one man kept vigil over one girl. The distance of master and servant dissolved. All that remained was a heart trembling with fear of loss, and a fragile body seeking safety in his arms. And when dawn broke, Samuel knew. For the first time in years, he had truly felt fear, not of the ghosts behind him, but of losing Eliza. The wooden house in Wyoming seemed to breathe a different air after the night Samuel kept vigil beside Eliza's fevered body. The fear of losing her had opened a hollow in his heart. Not to let in cold winds, but to make room for the warmth of another soul. Eliza's recovery was slow, yet steady. She was still frail, her cheeks drawn, but her eyes shone clearer, her skin no longer drained of color. Mrs. Henderson scolded and urged her to rest, but Eliza insisted on returning to her work. "I've been idle long enough," she said, and Samuel, though he wished to keep her still, could only watch her quiet steps with a worry that never left him. That night, the snow ceased, leaving only a soft wind across the porch. The fire in the hearth crackled and flared, light dancing on the walls, casting the study into a place half shadow, half glow, strangely warm. Samuel reclined on the long chair, the old ritual of feigned sleep nearly a habit. Yet tonight, he was no longer sure he wanted to pretend. The door opened gently. Eliza entered, carrying the basin of warm water. Steam rose faintly, mingling with the firelight until the room seemed cloaked in a soft haze. She set it down, knelt by the chair, and spoke no word. Samuel lowered his gaze, watching her slight figure, her careful hands dipping the cloth, lifting his foot with reverence. The water's warmth spread through him. Samuel drew a deep breath. Each stroke of her hand set his heart ablaze, not from touch alone, but from the tenderness folded into each careful motion. Every act felt like a whisper that he was no longer alone. He could bear it no longer. As Eliza bent over, her face caught by the fire's glow, Samuel reached and closed his hand around hers. "Enough," he murmured, his voice roughened. Eliza looked up, startled. "Sir, His grip tightened, drawing her hand toward his chest. His eyes darkened, not with the stern command of a master, but with the fire of a man undone by his own heart. He whispered, "I don't need clean feet. I need you to cleanse this body of sorrow." The words hung heavy, freezing the room. Eliza stilled, her hand trembling in his. Their breath mingled, the silence broken only by the pop of the fire. Then neither could resist. Samuel pulled her closer, his hands resting on her narrow shoulders. She gasped, her eyes shadowed with firelight, then closed them as his mouth found hers. The kiss began unsteady, hesitant, but soon both melted into it. Samuel held her tight, feeling her body tremble, yet not withdraw. Instead, Eliza's hands clutched his shirt as though afraid to let go. Coats, cloths, the weight of fabric fell away. The fire threw red light across their forms, on the long chair, then the wooden floor by the hearth. They were no longer master and servant. They were two stripped souls, finding each other to fill the emptiness. Eliza whispered his name between ragged breaths. Samuel soothed her, every movement slow, fearful of breaking her. And when at last they gave themselves wholly, every boundary fell, leaving only the truth of need. The night stretched endless. Outside, the prairie wind howled, but within the walls there was only firelight, skin, and the softest of whispers. When finally Eliza rested her head upon his chest, both breathless yet at peace, Samuel stroked her dark curls. His voice caught as he said, "You have torn down the walls I built for 3 years." Eliza lifted her eyes, shimmering. "I never meant to. Only to keep you from being alone." "Don't call me sir," Samuel whispered, touching her lips again with gentleness. "Call me by my name, Samuel." A faint smile crossed her face. She breathed, "Samuel." Her voice carried through the night, warmer than any flame. And to Samuel Carter, it was a promise that from this moment on, he was no longer the man who lived among ghosts, but a man who had found life again in a young woman's arms. February in Wyoming was always merciless, but that year the blizzard came sooner than any man foresaw. Wind roared down from the mountains, driving a million shards of ice against the window panes. Within hours, the valley lay buried in white, the trails and fences swallowed beneath drifts. Samuel Carter knew harsh winters well, yet that night, through the howl of the storm, he caught the lowing of cattle carried from the far pens. The pregnant herd was trapped out in the open. He could not sit still. "Eliza, stay inside," Samuel said quickly, pulling on another heavy coat and drawing the fur hood low. "I have to reach the herd." Eliza stepped forward, eyes dark with fear. "Samuel, out there. The wind will carry you away." His hand pressed to her shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "That herd feeds this ranch. I cannot abandon it." Before she could beg again, Samuel wrenched open the door and plunged into the white sea. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Eliza trembling, her heart clutched tight. The blizzard was not only fierce, it was cruel. Within minutes, the snow had swallowed his boots, the cold biting through his coat like needles. Samuel forced himself onward, reached the outer pen, drove the cattle from the drift into shelter. Each step felt weighted with stone. When at last the work was done, he realized the wind had risen harder, the snow a blinding wall that erased the way home. His breath thickened into ice, his vision dimmed, each stride heavier until his legs gave way. Samuel fell, his body sinking into the drift. Inside, Eliza could bear the waiting no longer. The storm pounded the roof, her heart hammering. "Mrs. Henderson, if we leave him out there, he'll die." The old housekeeper shook her head, lips pressed thin. But after a moment, she nodded, snatching up her heavy cloak. "Come then, girl. We won't let him face it alone." Two figures plunged into the gale, a small lantern trembling in their hands, nearly blown to darkness. Eliza's cries tore through the wind. "Samuel! Samuel!" Her voice scattered into the roar. At last the light fell upon a figure crumpled in snow. Eliza dropped to her knees, hands clawing the frost from his face. "Dear God! Samuel!" He still breathed, but faintly, lips blue with cold. Eliza nearly wept, heaving him upright with Mrs. Henderson's help. "Hold to me, Samuel. Please, don't leave me." They dragged him into the house, laid him by the fire. His clothes were stiff as stone, his skin icy to the touch. Eliza knelt beside him, fumbling at the frozen layers. "Fire alone won't save him," Mrs. Henderson said grimly. "He must be warmed through at once." Without thought, Eliza pressed herself to him, wrapping his frozen frame against her trembling body. Her small hands rubbed hard along his chest and arms, her tears mingling with the cold sweat on his skin. "No, no, you mustn't go," she whispered, lips trembling at his ear. "You still have me. I've never begged for anything. But this time, I beg you, come back." An hour, then two passed. At first, Samuel's body was stiff as carved ice. Then slowly, painfully, blood returned, dragging with it a searing agony. He convulsed, groaned, his frame burning as though fire raged inside. Eliza clung to him, whispering hoarse, broken words. "You're safe now. You're home." At last his eyelids stirred. Samuel opened his eyes to find Eliza's tear-streaked face close to his. Her hand clutched his, shaking but unyielding. "Eliza," his voice rasped, raw. She broke, pressing his hand to her cheek. "You frightened me near to death." In the flickering firelight, Samuel saw it, the same small hand that had washed his feet, wiped his sweat, now holding him to life. And he knew there was no denying the bond that had grown between them. He closed his eyes, not to escape pain, but to rest in a simple truth. He had been pulled back by love. Spring came late that year. Snow melted into thin streams running down the valley, leaving patches of sodden earth. Green shoots pressed through. Wildflowers scattered the slopes. At the Carter Ranch, life returned to its busy rhythm. Calves stumbling after their mothers, roosters crowing from the coop, and Eliza moving about the lit kitchen, her curls tied back, her eyes brighter after the storm that nearly claimed them. It seemed peace had returned. But beyond the fences, something else was budding, not flowers, but words. It began at the saloon in town. Men muttered, "Carter's lost his mind, mooning over that colored maid." Another sneered, "She's climbing high. Won't be long before she's in silk at his table, playing mistress of the house." Laughter, laced with scorn, spread quick as prairie fire. At church, when Eliza sat in the back pew, women turned their heads, lips twitching, eyes sharp with judgment. At the market, when she bought flour and sugar, the farmers' wives smiled sweetly to her face, then bent together, whispering once she passed. Eliza heard it all. At first she clenched her teeth, endured. But each whisper was a thorn, pressing deeper. One morning at the market, she heard a woman plainly say to another, "Poor mister." Carter. All that wealth, and he lets himself be snared by a cheap colored girl. Eliza froze, arms clutching the sack of flour, eyes stinging. She could not take another step, could not pretend those words had not struck her heart. That night, in her small room, Eliza sat by the wooden trunk. She drew out her old shawl, a few faded dresses, and began to fold them with trembling hands. Tears fell onto the cloth. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. "I only bring him shame. A man like him deserves someone else." "Not me," Samuel returned from the barns, his boots caked with mud. Passing the hall, he saw the door to her room cracked open, lamplight spilling through. He paused, then rapped softly. "Eliza?" She startled, hurriedly wiping her face and pulling the trunk shut. But Samuel had already stepped inside. His eyes darkened at the sight before him. Her belongings packed, her eyes red with tears. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, edged. Eliza bowed her head, voice shaking. I can't stay. They say things I don't want you to bear." Samuel crossed the room, his strong hands gripping her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. In his eyes burned a fire she had never seen, unyielding. "Eliza, listen to me." Each word struck like a hammer. "I lost everything once. Wife, child, my family. I thought I'd live the rest of my life in the dark. Then you came carrying light. I will not lose you to the poison of gossip," she sobbed, shaking her head. "But they'll scorn you. They'll call you blind." His grip tightened, his voice breaking. "Let them talk. I've lived too long for the eyes of others. It only brought me loneliness. This time, I choose for myself. For us." She stared at him, vision blurred with tears. The lamplight flickered over his face. A man scarred by grief, now standing firm, unshaken. In that moment, Eliza knew there was no turning back. This love was not hers alone. It was his, too, fierce, unwilling to be lost. Her hands fell from the trunk, leaving it gaping open, clothes in disarray. And then she collapsed into Samuel's arms. He held her tight, as though letting go meant the storm would carry her away. "I've lost too much already, Eliza," he whispered at her ear. "But I will not let you be another loss." In that small room, while the world outside hissed with its venom, they clung to each other. And though tomorrow the rumors would still spread, Eliza felt, for the first time, she did not have to carry them alone. That spring night, the little town hummed with more life than usual. The McAllister family's barn had been swept clean of hay, lanterns strung along the beams, glowing warm and gold, turning it into a dance floor for the whole community. Fiddle music trilled, boots stamped on wooden planks, laughter rang out, mingling with the smell of pies and apple cider. Eliza stood still at the edge of the room, her hands clasped tight at her waist. She wore the simplest dress she owned, a plain blue one Mrs. Henderson had pieced together from an old bolt of cloth. No lace, no ribbon, only fabric that clung neatly to her slight frame, making her warm brown skin stand out. Her curls were tied back, a few strands falling loose against her cheeks. She knew she was different, and felt it all the more when glances slid over her, lingering, then moving on with unspoken weight. In the lantern-lit barn, everyone else was twirling, yet Eliza lingered at the margin, telling herself she should be grateful just to stand and watch. But unease gnawed at her. The cruel whispers at the market, the sharp stares at church, all still echoing in her mind. The fiddle shifted to a brighter reel, the rhythm quickening, and then a hush swept the crowd when a tall figure stepped through the barn doors. Samuel Carter, the wealthiest rancher in the county, a man known for his cold reserve, now stood in a fitted black coat, polished boots gleaming, shoulders broad and commanding. All eyes turned, and the barn seemed split in two, half caught in music, half struck silent in awe. Samuel did not look around. His gaze cut straight to the corner where Eliza stood, small and anxious. In an instant he strode toward her, whispers rising like wind behind each step. Eliza swallowed hard, body tense. You don't need," she began. But before the words could form, his hand reached out, taking her trembling one. "You will dance with me," Samuel said, voice low and steady, pitched for all to hear. It was no request. It was a declaration. Eliza stiffened, shaking her head faintly. "Everyone is watching." Samuel bent close, his eyes stern yet gentle. "Let them watch. Let them see the truth." Before dozens of stares, he led her onto the wooden floor. The fiddle faltered a beat, then pressed on, as if compelled by the weight of their presence. At first, Eliza's steps were clumsy, her fingers clutching his hand as though to keep from falling. Her cheeks burned, her gaze fixed down, drowning in the buzz of whispers. But Samuel was patient, his palm steady at her back, his stride firm, guiding her into rhythm. "Lift your eyes," he whispered, meant for her alone. "Look at me." Hesitant, Eliza raised her gaze. The lantern fire gleamed in Samuel's dark eyes, and in that moment, the world around her dissolved. There was only him, the man holding her fast. One turn, then another, and suddenly a laugh escaped her. Short, unplanned, bubbling from a place she thought long gone. Then it burst fully, clear and bright, a sound even she had forgotten she could make. Her laughter stilled the barn. Faces turned, astonished, toward the center of the floor, at the man once called colder than stone, now smiling as he held a colored maid in his arms, and at the girl radiant as dawn itself. When the tune ended, applause thundered, some polite, some true, but Eliza trembled, ready to withdraw her hand. Samuel only tightened his grip, bending close to murmur, "One more." She faltered. Then, seeing his eyes, she nodded. The next tune rang faster, livelier. Samuel spun her, the blue dress fanning like petals, her curls loosening to sway with each turn. Eliza gave herself over, into the music, into his guiding hand. That night, beneath the barn's lanterns, they danced. Not only to silence the rumors, but to prove that love could burn bright, even under 100 judging eyes. And when the final tune ended, Samuel bowed low, pressing his lips to Eliza's hand before the entire town. In the stunned silence that followed, Eliza Johnson smiled, her eyes shining as though they carried an entire new sky. At last, the harsh winter yielded. Patches of snow melted into thin streams running down the hills, carrying February's chill away. The Wyoming Valley stirred with life anew. Calves tottered on unsteady legs across damp earth. Wildflowers of purple and gold pushed through the fields, and the sky gleamed so blue it seemed washed clean after weeks of storm. The Carter Ranch, once heavy with silence, now rang with motion. Hammers clanged as the hands repaired fences, cattle called across the pastures, and Mrs. Henderson's scolding voice echoed from the kitchen, all of it joining in a springtime chorus. Yet Samuel Carter knew the truest change was not in the earth or beasts, but within his own heart. He and Eliza no longer shied from glances in the house. She worked as faithfully as before, apron tied, laundry at the well, but whenever Samuel passed, their eyes met. No words needed. A single glance flushed her cheeks pink, and Samuel felt warmth rise in his chest. In the kitchen, when she poured him a glass of water, her fingers brushed his. That fleeting touch dazed him more than signing deeds for 1,000 acres. At noon meals, among the clatter and chatter, their eyes would find one another, and a faint smile on her lips was enough to make him feel alive again. Once he stood on the porch and watched her hang linens in the yard. Her plain dress swayed in the breeze, curls catching sunlight. She turned and caught him looking. Eliza smiled, a small, bashful smile, yet it struck Samuel's heart like the first time he had spurred a horse across an ice-choked river. He turned away, but could not hide the lift at his lips. The long nights in his study no longer weighed so heavy. Eliza still brought the basin of warm water, but now she lingered closer, allowing him to lay his hand over hers, holding it a heartbeat longer. At times, as the fire crackled, their eyes would meet, and both would laugh quietly without reason. The ranch hands noticed the shift. The master, once cold as stone, now lingered on his morning rounds, pausing only to watch Eliza at the milking shed. Mrs. Henderson, sharp-tongued and practical, only shook her head, though her eyes held something softer. Samuel knew he was stepping out of the shadows that had caged him 3 long years. He had thought his life reduced to ledgers and the moan of wind across barren hills. Yet Eliza, with her work-roughened hands, sorrowful eyes, and rare smile, had sewn life back into him. One evening, leading the horses out together, Samuel halted, reins clenched tight. Eliza looked up, worried. "What is it, Samuel?" His chest ached with words unsaid, that her presence had given him breath again, that since she entered his house the ghosts had fallen silent. But at last he only brushed a stray curl from her brow. "Nothing. I only realized I'm alive again." Eliza's cheeks burned and she turned away, though Samuel saw her lips curve faintly. That spring brought not only green, grass, but quiet moments binding them. At dawn they checked the newborn calves together. She knelt, stroking a gray calf still trembling on its weak legs, and Samuel, watching her gentle smile, felt his chest heat. At midday they shared bread and cured meat beneath a cottonwood. When she handed him the water flask, their fingers touched and did not part. Their eyes met, laughter bubbling in silence. Evenings, after supper, Samuel let her sit beside him while he worked the books. She leaned close, reading slowly through his figures, her eyes widening at the burdens he had borne alone. "You've carried too much by yourself," she whispered. He gave no reply, only laid his hand on hers and pressed. That same season, Samuel brought Eliza into town for the first time. They shopped for corn and bean seed. Eyes followed them, some curious, some cruel. Yet Samuel walked at her side, unflinching, never straying. At first Eliza lowered her gaze, but when she felt his steady hand at her back, she lifted her head, walking the street for the first time as an equal. Samuel sensed the change within himself. No longer a man bound to ledgers and haunted memories, but a man learning to laugh again, to share a meal, a glance, the simplest of joys with a woman. That spring, it was not only the prairie that bloomed. Samuel Carter's heart opened too, each petal trembling, timid, yet undeniable. He had found trust in tomorrow, in the eyes of Eliza, who had once been only a shadow moving quietly through his house. The hill behind the Carter ranch was quieter than any place in the valley. There stood the old cottonwoods, their spring leaves trembling in the wind, casting shadows over two small graves. Samuel Carter had come here more times than he could count in the past 3 years. Each visit, his heart felt like stone as he whispered to Margaret and the child buried there. But today was different. Eliza was beside him. Evening drifted down slow, the sun spilling gold across the valley. Samuel led the horse up the slope, his other hand gripping Eliza's small one. Her steps faltered when she saw the graves, yet her eyes shone with reverence, as though she had entered sacred ground and had to breathe more softly. "This is where I left a piece of my life," Samuel said, his voice low, gaze fixed on the two simple headstones. "I want you to know everything before I speak the words I must." Eliza stood still. The breeze carried the scent of new grass into her hair, tossing the dark curls about her face. She bowed her head, fingers tightening on the hem of her dress. "I don't want to wound you by bringing back the pain." Samuel turned, lifting her chin with his warm fingers. His eyes were deep, wet with sorrow, yet bright with resolve. "Pain is mine to carry, but today, I want to share it." With you, they stepped closer. Samuel laid a handful of wildflowers, gathered on the climb, beside the graves of his wife and child. He fell silent a long while, then murmured, "Margaret, James, today I bring someone with me. Not to replace you, but to walk forward with me. I pray, wherever you are, you'll understand." Eliza knelt, her hand brushing the stone. Her lips moved softly. "I promise to keep his heart warm so he'll never be alone again." Her voice was quiet, yet Samuel heard every word. He sank to one knee on the damp grass, bearing no gold ring nor roses, only his unguarded heart. Eliza gasped, "Samuel, you—" "I have no fine words," he said, voice shaking. "Only this. From this day on, I don't want you standing behind me as a shadow. I want you beside me, meeting life as my equal." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes shining. Never had she dreamed of hearing such words. From Samuel Carter, a man of wealth and silence, now kneeling at her feet, pleading to call her his wife. Samuel's hand rose, trembling as he touched her cheek. "Eliza, I lost everything once, but you pulled me out of the dark. If you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life walking with you." Eliza fell to her knees before him, her shaking hands clasping his. Tears slipped hot against his skin. I am nothing but a poor girl, Samuel. But if you truly want me, I give you all my life." His grip tightened, pulling her into his embrace. Their foreheads touched, eyes wet yet filled with peace. The hilltop wind sighed through the cottonwoods, leaves rustling as if in blessing. "Then from this day," Samuel whispered, "we are no longer master and servant. We are two souls once broken, now found. We are husband and wife." Eliza nodded, tears streaming. Between the quiet graves, a new vow was spoken. not to erase the past, but to build the future. When Samuel bent and kissed her, it was no fleeting passion, but a vow that she would never again walk alone. The moment stretched endless. When they parted, Eliza leaned her brow against his shoulder, hearing the beat of his heart beneath his coat. She whispered, "Are you certain you're ready? People will talk. They will not accept." Samuel stroked her curls, his gaze firm. "I've lived my life chasing their approval, and all it left me was an empty house. This time I choose for us." Eliza bit her lip, then laughed softly through her tears. "You are always so stubborn, and you've learned to love that stubbornness," Samuel answered, his tone rough but tender. They lingered beneath the tree, watching the valley spread below. Migrating birds cut a V across the crimson sky, the breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Samuel thought, if salvation ever came to a man, it was here and now. When at last they rose from the hill, Samuel was no longer the man kneeling before stone markers with a heart of grief. He walked beside Eliza, his hand locked in hers, as though for the first time he believed in tomorrow. On the Cottonwood Hill, with the sun sinking behind the mountains, two souls once shattered were bound together, and in the silent witness of the departed, a new beginning was born. That morning, the Wyoming Valley wore a purity it had never shown before. Dew clung to blades of young grass, catching the first sunlight and scattering it into 1,000 glittering jewels. From afar came the song of meadowlarks, mingling with the murmur of a stream slipping down the slopes. On the hill behind the Carter Ranch, once the place where Samuel had come to grieve in silence, an arch of cottonwood branches and wildflowers gathered from the valley stood ready. There were no church bells, no crowds of townsfolk, only a few close souls, the ranch hands, Mrs. Henderson, and the McAllisters from the neighboring spread. The spring breeze stirred gently among them. Yet to Samuel Carter, no grand ceremony could have been more solemn. Eliza appeared on the narrow path leading up the hill. She wore a plain white dress, stitched by Mrs. Henderson and a few women from town. No lace, no ribbons, just coarse fabric sewn with care. Yet as she walked, every seam seemed to carry grace. Her curls were bound back, with a few loose strands brushing her sun-kissed cheeks. Her eyes glimmered with happiness, edged with trembling nerves. Samuel stood beneath the arch, dressed simply but neat. As Eliza drew near, his heart pounded, and in that moment he felt the presence of Margaret and the small son who watched from the other side of the hill. But instead of pain, he whispered within, "Bear witness for me. I have found someone who will let me live again." The old minister opened his Bible, his voice low and steady in the wide air. He read the vows, and Samuel repeated them, each word firm. "I promise to walk with you, Eliza. Not ahead of you, not behind, but beside you, as equals facing this life together." Eliza looked at him, tears bright on her cheeks. Her voice trembled but held strong. "I promise never to let go of your hand, whether in winter's storms or spring's bloom. I will be your companion, not only in joy, but through the darkest days." The wind stirred, and the cottonwoods whispered like a blessing. When the minister nodded, Samuel bent and kissed Eliza. It was no loud display, but enough to draw silence from all who watched. The wind, the birds, the valley itself bore witness to the new beginning of two lives once marked by solitude. After the vows, they returned to the ranch. The workers gathered in the yard, some holding wildflowers, some brushing away tears. Mrs. Henderson, stern as ever, stepped forward and embraced Eliza tightly. "Child, from this day, you have a true home." Samuel swung into the saddle, then reached down and drew Eliza up beside him. Together they rode back toward the house, the sun spreading gold across the fields as if laying a path for them. The great wooden house, once echoing with emptiness, now filled with laughter. A small feast was spread in the kitchen, not fine wine or linen-covered tables, but warm bread, steaming soup, and simple toasts. Yet to Samuel and Eliza, it was the richest banquet of their lives. That night, in the glow of lamplight, Eliza lay beside Samuel on the wooden bed, their hands entwined. The house, once haunted by silence and the whistle of wind, now breathed with the warmth of two souls. Samuel turned toward her, the soft gold light falling across her face. He brushed back a stray curl and whispered, "Tomorrow is a new day." Eliza smiled, eyes half closed, and answered, "And this time we'll face it together." Outside, the spring wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the prairie, a promise of a life no longer shadowed by ghosts, but built on hope. In the days that followed, Samuel and Eliza shaped a new rhythm. Eliza stepped naturally into the role of mistress of the ranch, not by command, but through care and diligence. She saw to the meals of the hands, kept the barns in order, tended the garden. At first, the workers had been cautious. Soon they held respect for her steady kindness. Samuel, too, had changed. No longer burying himself in ledgers, he paused each morning on the porch, content to watch Eliza watering the garden or hanging linens in the sun. At night, peace filled him as he listened to her quiet laughter with Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen. One evening, they sat together on the porch, the moonlight spilling silver across the fields. Samuel clasped her hand, his voice low. "I once believed happiness had left me forever. But you've shown me that even after the longest winter, spring can return." Eliza rested her head against his shoulder, her eyes shining. "I once thought I was only a shadow, Samuel. But you saw me, and because of that, I've learned to see myself." That spring, the Carter house was not merely revived by Eliza's presence. It became a true home, where Samuel no longer feared silence, and Eliza no longer felt adrift. In every meal shared, every brush of hands, they wove a quiet song of love that would endure. And from that time on, with each sunrise over the valley, Samuel Carter and Eliza Johnson knew one truth: they would never walk alone again. The next summer, the Wyoming Valley shone brighter than ever. Green fields stretched to the horizon, horses thundered along the slopes, and the wooden house of the Carter Ranch rang with laughter. Eliza, now Mrs. Carter, moved slowly, her hands resting on her round belly. Mrs. Henderson scolded her with a fond shake of the head. "Leave the chores, child. Your only work now is to tend to the angel you're carrying." Eliza smiled gently, her eyes alight. Each day, she was not only Samuel's wife, but a mother preparing to welcome a small new life. Samuel watched over her with such care that the ranch hands laughed among themselves. He followed her every step, placing chairs for her to rest, bringing warm water each night with his own hands. "I lost a family once," he whispered one evening beneath the cottonwoods, "and I will never let you or our child go without." In September, the day came. Rain swept the valley, But in the wooden house, a first cry rose above the storm. Eliza, her face damp with sweat, gripped Samuel's hand and fought through the pain. Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Morrison worked swiftly at the bedside, while Samuel's heart clenched as he refused to look away from his wife. And then it came. A cry, sharp and strong. A baby girl was placed in Eliza's arms. Her eyes opened a sliver, gleaming like the sky after rain, her tiny hands clutching Samuel's finger. He choked with tears. He had believed he would never again hear a child's cry within these walls. Yet here it was, a sound like salvation, breaking the ice around his heart. "Our daughter," Eliza whispered, weak but glowing with joy. "Our little angel." Samuel held them both close, his eyes burning. "Thank you, Eliza. You have given me a true home." In the days that followed, the Carter Ranch seemed changed. Workers smiled quietly at the sound of a baby in the house. Samuel spent hours by the cradle, watching the child sleep, brushing a tiny curl that mirrored Eliza's. He named her Hope. In the evenings, Eliza sat by the window, rocking their daughter with a song from her childhood, while Samuel stood on the porch, gazing out at the green valley. Gratitude welled within him for being a father once more, but this time not in sorrow, but in love fulfilled. One dusk, with the sun sinking behind the mountains, Samuel cradled Hope on the porch and whispered, "You'll grow on this land, in the love of your father and mother, and I promise you will never know the lonely dark I once endured." Behind him, Eliza watched, her heart breaking with happiness. She remembered the timid girl who had once knocked on Samuel's door, trembling. That girl, once a shadow, now had a husband, a child, a home. That night, in the glow of lamplight, Samuel and Eliza lay side by side, their daughter asleep between them. Samuel turned, clasping Eliza's hand. "Eliza, the first day you came, I saw only a shy maid. Tonight, you are my heart, the mother of my child. You have turned this empty house into a home." Eliza squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "And you, Samuel, gave me what I never dared dream. A roof, a family, a love true and whole." Outside, the autumn wind whispered across the fields. Inside, a small angel stirred in her sleep. And Samuel and Eliza knew that each sunrise now opened not only a new day, but a new life, the life of three souls bound by love and hope. The story closes not with trumpets or grand weddings, but with the warmth of a house reborn in laughter and breath. Samuel Carter, once broken by grief, had found light in the eyes of a quiet girl. And Eliza Johnson, once afraid of her own shadow, was now wife, companion, and keeper of the hearth. Perhaps, at any age, one truth stands. Life will always bring winters. We lose, we grieve, we walk through days so cold we believe no spring will return. But this story reminds us, even after the harshest winter, spring can come again, if we endure, if we trust, if we dare open our hearts once more. The image of Samuel and Eliza beneath the cottonwood arch, whispering, "Tomorrow is a new day," is a message to us all. No matter the years, no matter how often we thought our hearts were closed, there is always a chance to begin again. Gentler, deeper, more precious. To you, our elder listeners who have walked so many miles of life, you may smile, seeing yourselves in this tale. Some may find Samuel in their hearts, strong yet lonely, carrying too much within. Some may find Eliza, once dismissed, once timid, but learning to stand tall and smile. And surely all of us understand the worth of a held hand, a knowing gaze, a true home. If this story stirs a memory, a lesson, or a moment from your own life, share it in the comments. We would be honored to hear. For your stories are the treasures that make us all richer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so that these Wild West love stories can keep warming hearts, reminding us that happiness is never too late. Tomorrow, and every tomorrow after, can always be a new day.